Let's stay with that story then, because Professor Sahar Aziz is director for the Centre for Security, Race and Rights at Rutgers Law School, and she joins us now from New Jersey. Thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. You were one of the 2,400 law professors calling for Judge Kavanaugh to withdraw. Did anything in Earlier's swearing in reassure you?
No, because what we saw during his testimony last Thursday, I think revealed his true character. And the concern is, for many of us who signed the letter, over 2,400 law professors, is whether or not he is going to be able to put his own partisanship aside when cases regarding rights to abortion, same-sex marriage rights, and other important individual rights cases come before him in the Supreme Court. Will he be able to put aside his allegiance to the Republican Party and his disdain for the Democratic Party as an independent and impartial judge? Because what we saw during that hearing was far from that.
Yeah, he says that there is no bitterness and he wants to be a force for unity. I suppose, in fairness, regardless of how bruising the confirmation process had been, he has a Conservative voting track record. So those subjects that you talk about, abortion rights, gay rights and voting laws, he would have gone to the Conservative end of the court anyway.
Yes, and that's why his platitudes are falling, I think, on deaf ears for those who believe that the Constitution is a living document that should reflect the evolution of social norms, as opposed to be literally interpreted based on the original intent of when many of these amendments were passed, which included a time where blacks were slaves, women couldn't vote, and the only people who could become American citizens had to be white and property owning. So there are many problems with his originalist interpretation, but when you couple that with his severe character flaws that were on display during that hearing, it's just going to cause a lot of concern about the legitimacy of the Supreme Court in the future, especially if they overturn many of these cases, the precedent for these individual rights cases.
Do you think we're now seeing the beginning of the Supreme Court not being able to sit above the political muckraking?
Well, this was certainly an example of what we call the politicization of the judiciary or the judicial politics. And I think that because he barely was confirmed, this is evidence that becoming a justice is now a political position much more than it is simply a professional, technocratic, legal position.
But can I ask you, do you not like it, Professor Aziz, because he's a Conservative judge? Would it be OK if he had liberal views?
Well, I think if he had been voted by 48 to 50, even if he had liberal views, I would be very concerned about the Supreme Court's legitimacy. I think it's up to each president to identify justices that have, although they may have leanings that are liberal or conservative, that at least are viewed as impartial and are viewed as objective and perceived, because perception matters when it comes to the judiciary and their rulings. So I think he was a fringe, and what he shows in his views are very fringe on the conservative side, as opposed to at least more moderate leaning on the conservative side.
And who do you think will be most galvanised by this as we head towards November? Just briefly, if I can ask you.
Well, absolutely the Democratic base, particularly women. I think women who are independent may now vote Democrat. I think this has been a big shock to upper middle class white women who saw themselves in Dr. Ford and said, here's this woman who has a PhD.
Professor Aziz, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're up against the clock. But thank you very much for joining us. It's been good to talk to you.
Thank you.